Well, it's the end of the day. You made time for this. I'm genuinely thankful, and I'd like to make the most of this time for you guys. For starters, let's do introductions first. My name is Mansi Harold. I am a senior service designer. What does that even mean? I essentially work as a consultant with organizations, startups, as well as large organizations, and I help them understand their users better, help them understand if they're solving the right problem. And most importantly, when they develop products and services, how do we make sure that those products and services are anchored in real human needs and not assumed ones? And this last line is what this session today is all about. I've been fortunate enough to work for last 18 years in this area, working with startups and large organizations. And sometimes I've been lucky enough to watch that journey of startups becoming a large organization. And that journey is quite fun to watch because the chaos, the pivots are really quite something. And every single time I've seen that journey happen, there's one thing that's common there, which is a founder that really decides to get brutally honest with themselves and ask that question, is this the right problem to solve? And that's what we're going to focus on today. So with that, let's get started. Now, the number that you see on the screen should stop you in your tracks. And that's not to demotivate anyone, but 90% startups fail. And the reason for that is not bad execution, lack of funding, lack of a good partner, and lack of a good team, but it's essentially building something that nobody really wants or is willing to pay for. So for today's session, that's what we're going to focus on. And it's good news is that this is the most preventable failure. That you can see it today, you can stop it right now, and all that it takes is a few weeks of talking to your potential customer and understanding what is it that you're solving for them. Most of you would have heard of Instagram, I'm assuming, or would be on Instagram, but not many of us know that Instagram, before it became Instagram, was something else. It was an app called Bourbon. And the idea of Instagram back then as Bourbon was that it was a location check-in app. Now, I don't know if you guys have heard of Foursquare. Foursquare used to be this app which was very popular in 2010. Idea was very simple. You could go anywhere. So you were at a gym, you could check in. You were at a restaurant, you could check in, and your friends could see where you were and could follow your journey. The idea was it was a part social media and part local discovery app. And Bourbon, the founders, found that idea interesting, so they decided to pretty much emulate the idea. They spent months thoughtfully, carefully deciding what the features should be, what should go in the app. They developed it, released it, and then came the rude shock awakening. People were not engaging with the app. And what they found was that when they started digging into the data, that the little bit of engagement that they did have with the app, 90% of that was coming with a tiny little feature, which was an afterthought, which was just put in as, all right, maybe let's also have this feature. People were obsessively using that, and that was the photo share feature. So that is what they looked at. Now, at this point, when as a founder, you see that the intended product is not being used as it was intended. It's that's the point of pivoting. That's the point where you can decide, all right, let's give it a few more months and see if it happens. Or do you rely the data, look at it from a customer perspective and decide that, all right, this is the time to pivot because this is what your users want. And that's what Mike and Kevin, who were the founders of Bourbon, did. They decided to pivot, they scrapped everything else, and they basically kept the one feature, renamed it to Instagram, and launched it. And the rest is history. It was bought over by Facebook for $1 billion in 2012. And it really it changed how we share photos, right? So the crux of it is looking at the data, making sure that you're not just looking at the data, but understanding your customers, why they're doing what they're doing, and have the courage to pivot. Another example, YouTube again. When it was started as a dating video app. So imagine your dating profile, but you could have it as a video. That's what the intention was behind it in 2005 when it was launched. They created it, started it, nobody was coming to the app. But when they started looking at the data, they realized that something unexpected was happening. People were actually sharing videos of just bizarre, unusual, funny things. And that's when they realized that maybe that's where they needed to pivot. And they did. And that's where, again, the magic happened because that's when we saw YouTube really explode and become such a big phenomenon. Crux of it is, as an organization, when you're looking at, as a startup or a large organization, when you look at data, don't ignore it. Look at what your customers are really doing, not how you intended for the product to work. And that's quite key. Now, the examples that we shared were really large organizations which had like a lot of venture funding, teams, runway, lots of money. Now, this may look like a strength from the outside, but I do want to share here something. As a large organization, the decision to pivot is not just a decision, it's a negotiation. You're talking to your venture funding partners, you're talking to your teams, you're talking to your board, you're talking to your leadership, telling them to scrap away something that they've spent 6, 10, 12 months building, and that can often take up to another 3, 4 months. So the speed is something that is not easy with large organizations, which have like such a so many different elements to basically crack. On the other hand, a startup that's bootstrapped, you can validate early, you can learn fast, you can build confidently. A decision to pivot is just a decision to pivot for you. And you can pivot as quickly as within a few weeks, and that is your true strength. Now, among the few things you could take away from this deck today, from this presentation today, one thing I definitely want you to take away is when we think about validation, a lot of people think of, oh, I'm validating the solution. But that's not the idea here. What I'm talking about is validating the problem before we validate the solution. And on paper, this sounds really obvious, but you'd be surprised at the number of brilliant founders who often ignore this. What they do is they'll fall in love with the solution, start building, and within 6 months, they'll have something, a polished looking UI, a beautiful pitch deck, wonderful presentation. And then when they go to the market, they realize either they've built something which the scale of the problem is not the same that they imagined it would be, or people are not willing to pay for it. And both those are not really great outcomes, right? So the biggest myth that we hear from a lot of people is if you build it, they will come. I can tell you this with confidence, this is a lie. It's infinitely harder to create something that people care about than just to build anything. So what I do want to share is what I've seen organizations do right is get the sequence right. Number one is, does the problem actually exist? So when we are talking about the validation, it's about validating if the problem itself exists or not validating different solution ideas, but the problem itself. Does it exist? Do real customers have this as a pain? And I have some frameworks today to share with you how you can identify if the problem is real or not. So I'm going to go through those with you. Second bit, which is it commercially viable? Is this something that people are willing to pay for? If yes, it has revenue potential, something worth going after. Third, which is now you build, and this is when you do the validation of different solution options. So you can have a few different ideas and directions to go in. This is where we start doing the validation of solutions to say that this is something worth going after. Cool. So the sequence remains problem validation first, identifying if there is commercial potential in it, revenue potential in it, and then getting into the solutions and validating solution ideas. Now, let's look at what are we going to be focusing on today. Number one, the 6 signals. I'm going to share with you what to look for when you're trying to identify if something is a problem or not, a problem worth solving or not. And again, these are not set in stone, but these are again directions, signals that you can take to identify if a problem is worth going after. Second, once you identified what to look for, how do you look for it? There are 3 validation methods I'm going to share. Number one, which is my favorite, and I'm sure a lot of you are already doing it, which is customer interviews. Talk to the potential customers who you think would have this problem, right? Fake door tests, I'm going to leave it at that because I do have some slides to cover what each of those means and how to do it as well. And then pre-commitment test, which is something like setting up a Kickstarter page for your startup. The third thing we're going to cover is a decision framework. So once you've validated the problem, once you've got some signals that, all right, this is something that is worth solving, how do you decide when to start building? Because sometimes you can get data, but it can be confusing, right? So you can have very mixed signals as well. So what do you do in those cases? And then at the end of this, I do want to share a 3 week action plan of what you can do today, starting now, in terms of how do you get some validation, get some results, and start moving your journey of your startup forward. So, again, this 3 week action plan is to be taken with a pinch of salt. Not every industry, not every category moves as quickly. So, I understand that you may take longer than that to talk to your potential customers, but this is just a rough idea of how quickly you can move with this. Cool. So let's get stuck into how do you identify if something is a problem worth solving? What are you looking for? Few things to look out for are, is there a workaround that they're using? If they've never tried solving something, the problem is probably not real or not painful enough for them to put aside time or money towards it. Real problems often have ugly, expensive, or maybe not expensive workarounds, but a lot of times people will have some workarounds. You'd be surprised at the kind of workarounds people use. I can give a small example here. Like, for example, if I take a case of, say, a travel money card, somebody using a travel money card, they often use like a combination of products because something doesn't give you cash, being able to withdraw cash when you're overseas. One product offers you a better rate on withdrawals and stuff like that. So people have their combination of products that they use. That's their workaround. And that's something that they've chosen to work with because the one product doesn't solve all their problems. This is how you identify your opportunity areas, that if people are using multiple products, why are they using multiple products? Is there the one product that is their preferred? What are things that's missing? Second, time, money, cost. Real problems cost time or money. Ask how much time or money would you save if this were solved? And if it was a struggle to answer that, the urgency may not be strong enough. Third is frequency. You're looking at how frequent is a problem. Expectedly, anything that is a more daily, weekly kind of a problem signals a higher urgency. But that's not to say something that appears more at a monthly frequency would be of less importance. It matters if it has a strong financial or has a strong emotional impact. That would be something that would be significant. So high frequency is urgency, but also with a caveat that for something that is less frequent, if it is of high value, that is also something worth looking at. Number four, which is now these are not in the order of importance, while there are numbers there, don't think of it as this is the order in which they stand. Unprompted. When I say unprompted, what I mean is this something that they mentioned without you probing in? Say, for example, you ask, what are some of the challenges you face with it? Or what are some of your frustrations with the product? And that's when it starts coming up. Sometimes, if you even ask a question as simple as, how has your experience of using XYZ product been? And that's when they'll start talking unprompted that, oh, I'm facing this issue with it. So real problems come up naturally in conversations, and the more naturally they come up, the stronger those problems are. Number five here is, say, for example, if you talk to 10 people, if 7 out of 10 people tell you the same problem, it is a real problem. Consistent and again and again coming up. So repetitive mentions is something that I would look out for. Scattered mentions, probably not very widespread. So if you like 3 people out of the 10 that told you that this was a problem, I would not go after that. And number six to watch out for is emotional language, because a lot of times people will describe something like, I hate dealing with this, or this drives me crazy, this drives me nuts. Emotions signal real frustration, and that's where you're looking for, they would have a real motivation to switch to something better. And these six signals are found often work pretty much across categories, across different sizes of organizations. And when you're listening for these, you'll often find your answers in terms of a solution exists, it's not a complete solution today, and stuff like that. So, what do you do when you have these signals? There are things that you can do in terms of when to prioritize and when to park. If people mention it without being asked, something worth prioritizing. If it happens regularly and costs them real time and money, worth prioritizing. They've already tried to solve it themselves. Multiple people describe it in the same way independently. These are all problems worth prioritizing. On the other hand, you really had to lead them to a conversation. After 5 questions later is when they tell you that, oh, yeah, this is something that I sometimes struggle with. Not a real problem. They describe it as annoying but manageable. Nobody's tried to fix it, or they don't have a workaround for it. Only one or two people mentioned that it is out of everyone that you spoke to has that problem. So these are indications that it's probably not as strong a problem as you think it is. Or what it suggests is it's a point to pivot. What that means is maybe it's a problem, but for a smaller cohort of your users, not for everyone. And then your task becomes, how do I find the people who this is relevant for? Now that we talked about the 6 signals to watch out for, how do you sort of get this information? How do you validate? What method to use? And this is where we're going to talk about the methods. We're going to talk about customer interviews, fake door test, and pre-commitment test. And the idea here is that, each of these answers a different question, and the order here is important. Customer interviews, it's one of the best ways as a starting point. You understand if a problem is real or not, who has this problem. In terms of time, it'll cost you 4 to 5 hours of your time, probs tops. Probably free or max, you can take somebody out for a coffee for half an hour of their time. I'd always recommend starting here. And I know, like saying this, I do want to caveat it with a lot of people find the idea of approaching strangers and talking to a stranger very intimidating. And I'm not going to take that away from it. It is. But what I do want to give you there is that it's important to the way you position it. You're not pitching for a product, you're not pitching for an idea, you're not asking for money. What you're pitching there is that, look, I'm trying to understand this problem space better. And you seem like you may have some experience here. Is this something that you would want to, talk about? And I'd love to take you out for a coffee for this. You can find people on different platforms, and I'm going to talk a bit more about it on the next slide, how to go about doing it. But yeah, so essentially you can conduct interviews with people who are your target audience. In terms of fake door test, you can create a platform which really shows what is the problem that you're trying to solve and how you're going to approach it. And then look for if there's any kind of engagement you get on that. And the third and the last one is about the Kickstarter. This is the strongest metric that you get because this is where people care enough to make a commitment. They are essentially signing up to say that, oh, yeah, I'm ready to be a beta tester. I'm happy to be an early sign up. They have follow-up questions around your product idea. And that's a pretty strong metric compared to the other two previously. But going straight to pre-commitment, going straight to fake door testing, you'll essentially miss out on understanding why people do what they do and what is it that would click with them in the first place. So I highly recommend to do it in this order. Um, cool. Let's talk about interviews. As I said, that it's can be pretty intimidating and a lot of people can shy away from it, but I highly recommend sort of creating a bit of a pitch, talking to people about what is that you're trying to do. You're not pitching your idea, you're not pitching a solution, you're simply trying to understand if this is a problem that they face and how do they solve for it right now. How do you find these people? You can find them on LinkedIn, Reddit communities. Reddit communities are found quite helpful because you often have them listed by an interest area. So you can go to people who you know would be interested in something, say what the Reddit community is all about. Facebook groups, industry forums, all of these are great ways to reach out to your specific target audience. You reach out with, I'm researching so and so problem. I'd love to understand your take on it. I'm happy to take you out for a coffee for that. Use a script. I do have a script on the next slide. The idea is to keep it very open questions. A lot of times I've seen sort of a mistake people can often make is to ask direct questions in terms of how do you find this product? Instead of that, open up with, I'd love to understand, talk me through about the last time you, say, for example, we take the case of travel money cards as an example, as a product. I would ask the person about, I'd love to understand about, the last time you were traveling. Tell me a bit more about it. Open it with a story, and then you get into How did you go about, managing your expenses while you were overseas? How did you manage, your payment method? What were you using to pay for things when you were overseas? And that's when the conversations opens up and they start talking about what they use. And then it just becomes another open question of, and how was the experience with that product? So keeping very open questions instead of leading questions, very important, because a lot of times we can get stuck into our product and can get stuck into, all right, what do you like about this? What do you not like about this? And that usually doesn't give you as good insights as you would get with open questions. As I said, yes, don't pitch, just listen for the patterns that they're describing. And when you start talking to people over and over again, the more consistent your script stays, the better, because that's when you'll see if you're hearing the same thing over and over again in interviews. Look for jobs to be done. Now, this sounds like a bit like a jargon. What I mean here is essentially a job is not a product. It's essentially around what is the outcome that they're trying to achieve. It is not about what product were you after. It's about what were you trying to do. And basically, people will tell you in the same example of a travel money card, people will tell you things like, I basically wanted to avoid international transaction fee, or I wanted a card where I had a few ATM withdrawals free for me and I didn't have to pay for those and stuff like that. So those become your outcomes that people are looking for. And that is where the opportunity lies. People don't want something like a queue management software. They basically want people to stop calling every minute asking if the table is ready. That's another example. So, yeah, essentially we are focusing on outcomes and not really features. And that's where you'll get to understand what is the core problem that they're trying to sort of solve with a product. Another question that I often get is around interviews is how many people should I interview? Good question. I would say it totally depends upon the number, the size of your market, or what we call TAM, which is total addressable market. If it's a very niche product, or if it's something which is business to business kind of a product, I would say 5 to 8 interviews is a good starting point. What I would look for is quality over quantity. And when I say that, I mean have good 30 to 45-minute conversations with people where you have a good understanding of what their current experiences are, what their frustrations are, what their pain points are, and what is it that they're looking to solve for. Similarly, if it is a broader product, much broader market for a consumer product, I would say minimum 15 to 20 interviews. And that's where you start seeing the pattern repeat itself. The more repetitive the pattern, the stronger it is. Um, Another really good technique here is before you start an interview, and you have your set of questions that you're asking, you need to write down your hypothesis. What is it that you're trying to understand? That users use XYZ product for this. And that's when you see that if your hypothesis was true or not at the end of the interviews. So this really helps you stay true to your intent behind the interview. Also track during the interviews how many people mention something unprompted when it comes to a pain point or a challenge. A small thing that I would talk about is a good check for yourselves is that when you see people describing something exactly in the words that you have drafted as a hypothesis, you'll often find that you're either asking them leading questions or you're basically leading them to it. So you'll often find that people will not exactly use the same words and metaphors to describe something. You'll have to arrive at it. So a red flag is to watch out if you are basically asking any kind of leading questions or leading them to somewhere. In terms of time, this would be about 4 to 5 hours of your time. A good practice is to have a discussion guide where you have, say, 8 to 10 topics that you want to cover in a 30-minute interview, 45-minute interview, and then you just stick to those. Try recording your interviews if you can, at least audio recording. And these days, you do have a lot of AI tools available which you can use for like synthesizing or giving you quick early prompts of what are the key things they're picking up. You can even use things like ChatGPT for it. A big important thing to remember when you're doing interviews is to get permissions from people for and their consent for using the information that they're sharing with you. You need to describe to them how you're going to be using that information. Very important practice to have always, always. So, yeah, in a nutshell, this is basically all about interviews, which is where you're going very open and understanding from them what the pain points are. Once you've understood what the pain points are, you use that to define what your pitch would be. You do use that to define what is it that the problem space that you are looking to solve for. And you can refine your problem space based on what you hear from these interviews. It can become, say, for example, you were targeting a pain point which was much broader, much bigger, but you realize during interviews it is something like, say, for example, you were designing something for young adults, under 25-year-olds, and this is a product that you're creating. You realize, on the other hand, that it is something that is only relevant to students. That changes who you're talking to, and that changes what you're going to say to them. And that determines your next step. These are just some small little questions I've shared here as an interview script example. So, say, let's go back to the example of travel money card. I'm exploring how, say, individual travelers or solo travels handle, paying for different things when they are traveling overseas. This question changes if my audience changes. If I'm looking at something like group travel and how do they split money together, that's when the definition of my target audience changes. Would I talk to individual solo travelers if I'm trying to understand how people split money or how people share expenses when they're traveling overseas? Probably not. I'll, in that case, be speaking with friendship groups that travel together or families that travel together, etc. Can you tell me about the last time you, say, traveled to any overseas destination? And then you understand from them where they went, how they went about it, and then slowly start taking the conversation towards payments. What was frustrating about it? How do you currently solve it? Two of my favorite questions because it gives you so much in terms of what are the workarounds that people use. How much time and money would you save with a better way? A very important thing in interviews to notice is I've been doing it for like almost 2 decades, and I still find it so interesting to see what people say versus what they do can be so remarkably different. They can totally tell you, yeah, I'd absolutely use that. It's a great idea. I'd pay for it. They're being polite. They're not lying, they're just being nice. What they do, on the other hand, is do they allocate budget for something? Do they make a pre-commitment? Do they actually take out their wallet? Those are the kind of things you look out for, that this is what they do. When you ask people, is this something that you would recommend to someone? Yes, I would. Do they actually go and make a purchase for that same product again? Do they repurchase it? Maybe not. So actions can be quite different from what they say. And what I mean by that is sometimes watching out for their actual behavior when they do things with, say, a platform that you created or a prototype you created. That'll tell you a lot more as well. Which takes us to the second method, which is the fake door test. The idea here is creating a simple one-page site describing the problem that you're solving and what is it that you're building. You don't need a product. You don't need a page for people to see what are the complete details of it. All that you have is a single landing page with probably one or two clickable buttons. Either they can share their email address if they want to sort of be an early bird sort of member to the product, or they can ask questions. Both those metrics will give you engagement. Both those metrics will help you understand how many people are finding this problem relevant. Why fake door? Why is it called fake door? Because there's nothing behind that platform. When they click on it, the second page basically takes them to say that, you caught us before we are ready. We're still working on it. If you Google, you'll find quite a few examples of how companies have done it. There are, I'm trying to think of some examples. I think, was it DocuSign, or I could be getting the name wrong, but one of the companies, they basically, what they did was created, Zynga does this quite a bit. Zynga does create their new games as fake door tests. They see how the interest is from people, and if it's something that people are getting interested in, they go ahead and create those games. How do you go about doing that? You can create your page using AI tools such as Claude Code, Framer, Webflow, a lot of different tutorials out there that can guide you as to quickly how do you create something like that. You can deploy it for free on something called Netlify. Netlify is a hosting platform which gives you hosting credits for free each month, and you can add a clear headline that this is the problem that do you want a solution for, or are you struggling with, or is this a problem that's relevant to you, kind of a thing. Again, you can tic-tac with different AI tools to understand how to make that headline a bit more catchy, a bit more relevant for people. And then once you've done with that, once you've created that platform with a couple of buttons which are clickable, and you host it on Netlify, that's when you try and get eyes on it. And that is going to be your metric. You post it on different Reddit groups, Facebook groups, LinkedIn, Slack, Discord, wherever you think your target customer might be, you post it there. Another option is there are platforms like Beta List or Indie Hackers, and all these are platforms built for early stage ideas where people actively browse and sign up for things that they're interested in. All of these are free and self sort of selecting. So you're not forcing anyone to sign up for it. A sign up or any kind of engagement is a metric that this is something that is relevant to that person. This is something that piqued their interest. What are you looking for is any kind of engagement, sign-ups, replies from people, people sharing it with their network. All of those are worth tracking. In terms of the amount of time that would take, it can range from a few hours a day, depending upon your comfort with different AI building tools like Claude Code, to a couple of days, depending upon how quick you are at setting it up. But completely free in terms of giving you that early feedback that if this is how you've decided to sort of phrase your problem once you've validated it, is this something that's relevant to your target audience? And the other thing to watch out for at this stage is when you start looking at who's sort of replying back, what are the kind of like feedback that you're getting? Is this more relevant to a certain cohort of people than others? Something that might give you quite interesting insights. The third one, which is the pre-commitment, and this is the strongest metric in my opinion, because this is where you're directly reaching out to potential customers and asking that, look, I'm building this. Is this something that you genuinely want to exist? Using platforms like Kickstarter, etc., where you can host what your product would be. This is when it's coming alive. And you can basically get people to sign up as beta testers. When you get that kind of an interest from people, people are ready to be beta testers, people are asking when it'll be ready. That's when you know this is something that they would be willing to pay for. And then you ask them the question that is this something that you would be willing to, pay for? And Kickstarter allows you to get that kind of a metric where people can sign up early to be investors in the company as well. Now, at this point, you've done quite a bit of validation, you've done testing from different methods and different levels of strength. So what do you do? Important one to know, when do you build, when do you pivot, and what do you do in case of mixed results? Let's say for the purpose of this, you've spoken to 10 people. If, say, for example, there's seven people plus have given you this mentioned this problem, even unprompted or prompted even, but they are talking about that, yes, this is a problem that I struggled with. This is something that I would love it if there was a solution that existed. They have a current workaround. They basically have some way of like sort of managing this problem today. Two or three people express genuine willingness to even pay for it. This is a complete green light scenario. You absolutely go ahead and you have enough data, you can build it. Second, which is when the problem isn't real. So you have three or few mentions of people. It's not really a real pattern in that case. Only when you asked, you led them to the question, and that's when they sort of gave you that answer that, yeah, maybe this is a problem, but not really as big a problem. It all sounds cool, but they're not really willing to pay for it. It's not a problem that is a big enough problem for them. In that situation, I would say you need to pivot. And the third, which is something that you often find, it's something that you find more often than not, is mixed results. You got, of the 10 people that you spoke to, you got 5 positives and 5 negatives. This is pretty common. What do you do in that case? One thing that you need to do is split your interviews by 5 positive and 5 negative, and then start looking at the common patterns between the positives. What was it that they like about the idea? What was it that basically liked the problem statement and said that this is something that I would be interested in? You'll find often there are either common patterns by demographics, common patterns by different level of industry that they come from, different level of demographics, different level of I'm trying to think of other examples, but essentially what you'll see is common patterns there. That is it specific to a cohort of your customers that they're finding this relevant? And similarly, you also got to see the no's, the ones who did not like the problem. What was it about them that they did not like? So the common patterns is what's going to give you quite a bit of insights. You narrow down your target, so you understood from that that this specific cohort of customers is more likely to like this particular problem space. You can, in that case, zone in on that particular cohort of people and do further interviews with them just to understand that is your understanding correct. If not, you again pivot back and come back to understanding what is it that makes some people like it and some people not. But this is one which takes a little bit of time. What it does do is remove that risk down the line for you. Because once you're doing this repetitively a few times, you'll be much more confident going in and creating this solution for this problem because you know that this specific cohort of customers is what likes it. It is relevant to them. It's not going to work for everyone. So you're not going to be wasting your effort down the line. So what we're looking for is repeated patterns. What we're looking for is unprompted mentions of a problem space. And what we're looking for is people's willingness to pay for something. Another thing that I often find startups find very relevant is looking at a bit of competitive validation. Now, when you look at competitors, if competitors exist for this particular problem space, these are again market signals. So if there are 10 plus competitors, it's a very, very saturated space. It's a very crowded space, I would say. Market is valid, it is crowded. The problem is definitely real, but you will need to find a differentiation angle in that case. You will need to have something that you stand out for, or something that is very unusual about you that will attract people. Can you build it faster? Can you build it better, cheaper for a specific niche? All of those are questions to consider. I wouldn't say this is a write-off. I would say that in this case, you have to be very sharp with what your proposition is. 2 to 3 competitors exist. This is your sweet spot. This is where a market exists and there is room to win. So competitors validate that there is a demand that exists there out there. It's not very oversaturated. This is the best position to be in. But even with this, I would highly recommend talking to your competitors' customers to understand where the pain points are or what the opportunity is. The last one, which is the most risky position, which is if there are 0 competitors. So you think that the market doesn't exist. A lot of times people think that they've found a gap, they found a market that doesn't exist, and they're going to create that market. This is the riskiest position because you don't know if startups have already tried and failed at it, right? So it's something worth understanding a bit more. It requires the most amount of validation before you build anything. What you do in this case is you go back to your customer interviews. If people found the problem real and urgent, you may want to understand that what are they doing to solve for it today? And if they would be willing to pay for it. If it's really a problem that is real and urgent, you may actually have identified a genuine gap, and that's something worth going after. But if the interviews seem very lukewarm and you don't get like a real signal, I would say watch out in that case. So yeah, in terms of how do you use competitors, talk to your competitors' customers and understand what are the need gaps that they have today. Now, I'm also conscious of the time. I'll try and wrap this up in the next couple of minutes so that we can have some time for the questions. As I was saying, yeah, in terms of the 3-week action plan, try and spend the next 1 week getting at least 5 to 10 interviews if you can. Second week, try and get a demand signal, which is where you're trying to get a sense of if you create a fake door test, if you create a Kickstarter page, are you going to get people to sign up for it? Are you getting any kind of interest, engagement on it? And the third is once you see what kind of traction you're getting on it, you decide to whether you validate or you pivot at that point. One thing to remember and to take away is pattern is undeniable. If you keep hearing the same thing, that's your point, that's your marker that you know that, all right, I do have an idea worth building. I do have a problem worth solving because this is something that is consistent that I'm hearing again and again, and this is a problem that would be relevant space for a lot of people. Once you do all of that, I highly recommend something called Lean Business Canvas. This is a 9-point framework. What it does is 9-box framework. What it does is it really brings your entire business idea on one page. And as you're doing validation, you're basically trying to fill in each box. And the number of times you'll do it, you'll find that every single box, you need to do a certain amount of validation to fill it up or to have answers for it. So you will go back, iterate on your validation exercise to get answers to all of this. Say, for example, what channels are you going to use to reach them? You may need to do a specific research to understand what channels would you use. So there would be 2 or 3 rounds of iterations that you would do to understand and fill out all of these different boxes. But what this would do is it's a great planning tool. It's a great one pager for your idea or your business on a page. When you go for any kind of pitch conversations, when you go for any kind of funding conversations, it's great to have that simple but very profound understanding of your business that you take to venture capitalists and angel funders, because it just really shows that you understand the business inside out. And that pretty much brings me to the end of it, which is real insiders. Like the first idea that you have is just a hypothesis. When you see the user behavior, that's the data. And sometimes when they don't match, that's exciting, but that's where your opportunity lies. And that's where you need to do a little further digging. Um, I would leave you this with this one thought that a lot of founders in your position don't do this work. And that's where we talked about that number in the beginning, which is the 90%. If you start validating early enough, go back and question yourselves with that honest, brutal question that is this something that is worth solving? I think that's where you'll find your real opportunity. And I'll open up the floor for questions now. Brenton, feel free to take everyone off mute, please.
Yep.
I'll stop sharing my screen so that it's easier.
You should be able to unmute yourself now, everyone in chat. So if you've got a question, just feel free to speak up.
No questions?
No?
Any thoughts would be happy to talk about. Yeah.
Oh, unable to mute. Uh, I've
Ooh.
got the box unchecked. Otherwise, if you want to pass your questions into the chat, I'm happy to pass them on. Hmm. I'll just start with one
Hello.
from Ruben,
Sure.
which is how do you recommend applying the 5 whys technique? And should we also be validating our interviewees to make sure that they fit the target market?
That's a really good question. So, yes, number one, which is the 5 whys technique, I highly recommend it. You do want to understand in as much depth as you can from your people in terms of like what happened and why did they do a certain something. 5 whys makes a lot of sense, especially when you start talking about the workarounds. So when you talk about workarounds, you really want to understand why did they go for a specific solution and not something else. That's where you'll try and understand in a lot more depth why they do what they do. And the second question that you had was about validating your interviewee. So, what I understand from that is that you're trying to make sure that they're the right demographic that you have in mind, they're the right psychographics that you have in mind. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe that's the gist of it.
And which is what I was trying to say, that when you're going for people, you wouldn't just be going in a cafe and just talking to a random person, which is where you try and use communities like, say, Reddit communities, Facebook groups, etc., where you can find people who would have that interest group which you're going after. So, highly recommend doing that. But even in the beginning, when you speak to those people, just a couple of those questions to understand that would love to know a little bit more about, say, if it, again, I keep going back to the example of travel money card. Have you used a travel money card? What was your experience like? So make sure they are someone who've used the product that you have in question.
Okay.
Happy to ask a question, but I also know that Ajwal put a message in the chat well before I put my hand up.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for the session, Mansi.
Thank
My
you.
question lies around, how we as a co-founder or a product lead, when you're building something and when you're validating your product, then you later find out that, the market is somewhere else, and you're
Mhm.
building and you find that, you're building a wrong product, and you
Mhm.
already spent so much of your time building it, that your dev team is already invested so much in it that you are quite confused as to how you are going to communicate with your dev team as to we're building the wrong thing, so this is what we should be building based on these facts. So
Mhm.
how do we ensure that we build the right thing, when we've invested so much of our time, and how do we ensure that dev team do not lose their morale?
Morale.
That's
Yeah.
something that I've been struggling with, because currently I found out that we're
Mm.
building something, however, there's demand to it, but the market is actually asking for something else. So if
Right.
you have any thoughts on it.
Look, I mean, what I say about this is it's same as they say about real estate. The best time to do research was yesterday, and the next best time is now. So essentially, if you are finding out strong signals about something that it is not the market that you're going after, it is not the customer that's going to buy this product. Think of this situation. There's something called we can do a pre-mortem. We can also do like say for example, if this product were to launch in 3 months from now and it failed, what would the cost of it be? So and basically you change the conversation to if you were to go ahead and launch it, say for example, our sunk cost so far is $100,000. If you were to go ahead and launched it, had the whole go to market and everything, all sorts of marketing effort behind it, this would completely change to a much bigger figure, and that would be at that point a much bigger and harder question to answer because you would have sunk in more time, more effort, more energy into it, and you would not be able to see the results. So while it is a sunk cost right now, it is a lesser sort of I'd say it's going to be less painful than in the future when you may not find it successful after the launch efforts. I'm not sure if that answers your question. Cool.
Yeah. Sorry, I was not able to mute back then. I think it's more about, I think you mentioned it quite well. I think it's more about uh, if you wanna like if I'm building the right thing right now rather than building the wrong thing for the long run. So I think it makes sense. Also regarding so I've talked to like few of my devs, right? And some of them are on board.
Mhm.
However, it's some of the devs who I have to convince as to like, so these are the things that we need to focus on. So do we discard that entire product right away, or do we try to salvage something from that product if we can? What's your take on this?
Well, if you can salvage, that's always a good idea because then you're going to be able to take something forward. But if there is something that's completely not working, my leaning is towards use data, use evidence to support your argument. And you can always, if effort has been made towards something, it can be parked to see if in the future you can basically find another target market that could find it relevant. But salvage what you can and use data to support your evidence. Cool. Over to you, Ben.
Thank you. How do I pronounce your name? Is it
Mansi.
Fancy? Very nice to meet you. Thank you so much.
No worries.
I I suppose I'm really excited to go on the journey of um, problem validation
Yeah.
and go through those steps and even build out that canvas as well. I suppose I think I've mostly validated the problem already,
Hmm.
and I've come up with like a product and it's currently selling at a slow pace with three different target segments.
Okay. Okay.
And I'm trying to maybe take those steps with the fake door and things like that for those
Yeah.
segments.
Yeah.
But then the challenge that I'm also facing is I've come up with a bunch of other solutions as well, like so many,
Right.
like maybe a dozen.
Right.
And so I'm kind of in my mind, it's way too complex, and I'm just trying to make sense of how to go about it. Maybe I start with just the one product that I've got at the moment.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
I think that's a really good approach, the way you're taking it, that you're already aware that 12 is way too many. So really good starting point, I would say, because that's you often hear all that you end up doing is you spread yourselves too thin if you have too many solutions to go after and you're trying to basically be fair to each of those. I would suggest that so far, based on the feedback that you're getting, are there any that you're getting more positive feedback for? If there are specific cohorts of customers that you have these ideas for, 100% I would recommend fake door testing just to see the kind of response you're getting.
Okay.
And then
So
from there, you can prioritize.
I want to do them all, but I have to test them, right?
Yes,
Um, and I'm also pressuring myself to grow my Instagram following so that when I
right.
do bring out
You
signups
get
and things
that.
like
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
um, but yeah,
Another great tool for doing that kind of a prioritization is something called the desire DVF framework, which is desirability, viability, and feasibility. All you're looking for is how many people really like the idea. But then when it comes to your impact and effort that you're gonna like have to build these, how viable is it and how feasible is it? So that
wow,
again helps you. It's not a proper quantified method. It's almost like loosely you're going to put together that this is the high effort, medium effort, low effort, and that'll give you some answers.
thank you. That's amazing. So helpful.
Right. Thank you. I think there's another question in the chat. Uh,
Yeah, Ellie, do you want to? I'll ask it on her behalf. So the question is, what is the most unconventional way you've seen a founder create a stake in the game, prompting potential customers to use their own time, money, or money just
mhm.
to prove that they are actually interested?
Well, that's a really good question. I'm now thinking about it. Um, well, Kickstarter's been around for a while. Um, I guess some kind of either you need to have some kind of a benefit to the customer. Either you create something that they would take away, and so they could in that case say, for example, if it's a small little downloadable something that would be of value to your customer. But I would not imagine them putting in time, money, and effort without any takeaway for them, without any benefit to them. So that would be my sort of feedback on that.